My name is Sarah, and I'm 29 years old. At dinner, my husband stood up in the middle of a crowded restaurant and announced to everyone at our table, "I'm done with her. She's pathetic." I felt every single pair of eyes turn toward me, staring with pity, waiting for me to break down and cry like some broken, desperate woman, but instead, I just smiled and slowly pulled out my phone. What happened next made him drop to his knees and beg me not to press send, and it destroyed everything he had built. Everything. Before I tell you exactly what happened, if you're enjoying this story of justice, hit that like button, subscribe to Revenge Sparkle, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to that moment, because I need you to understand just how calculated and cruel this man really was. It was a Friday evening in October, and we were at one of those upscale restaurants in downtown Seattle, the kind with exposed brick walls and Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling, where every dish costs more than a week's worth of groceries. My husband Marcus, who's 32, had specifically chosen this place. He'd insisted we go to dinner with his work colleagues and their partners. He'd even insisted I buy a new dress for the occasion, something elegant, something that would make me look good next to him. I remember standing in the fitting room at Nordstrom, holding up a navy blue dress, thinking how strange it was that he suddenly cared so much about what I wore to a casual work dinner. I should have known something was wrong. Marcus never cared about making me feel beautiful. He only cared about how I made him look. We arrived at the restaurant at 7. Marcus's colleagues were already there. His best friend David, who works in the same department, Tom from accounting, Kevin from marketing, and their wives, Emily, David's wife, who always looked at me like she pitied me, Rachel, Tom's wife, who barely spoke to me, and Jennifer, Kevin's wife, who I'd actually liked until that night. They were all sitting at this long table near the windows, and when we walked in, I saw David pull out his phone. At the time, I thought he was just checking messages. Now I know he was getting ready to record my destruction. Marcus pulled out my chair for me, which he never did. Another red flag I missed. He was being performatively affectionate, touching my shoulder, calling me honey in front of everyone. I sat down and ordered a glass of wine, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Something felt off. The energy at the table was weird, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. We made it through appetizers. We made it through the main course. I was cutting into my salmon, trying to make conversation with Jennifer about her kids, when Marcus suddenly stood up. He cleared his throat like he was about to make a toast, and everyone at the table immediately went quiet. I looked up at him, confused, my fork suspended in midair, and then he said it. "I'm done with her. She's pathetic. I can't do this anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. The entire restaurant seemed to go silent, or maybe it was just my hearing shutting down, I don't know. But I felt every single person at that table turn to stare at me. Emily's eyes went wide. Rachel put her hand over her mouth. Jennifer looked away like she couldn't bear to watch. And David just sat there with his phone pointed at me, recording my humiliation. I could feel the weight of their pity crushing me. They were waiting for me to cry, to scream, to beg him to reconsider. They were waiting for me to be exactly what Marcus had told them I was. Pathetic, emotional, unstable. A woman who couldn't handle being publicly dumped. But here's the thing. 2 weeks ago, I found out exactly what kind of man Marcus really was, and I'd been planning for this moment ever since. So instead of crying, instead of begging, instead of giving him the reaction he so desperately wanted, I set down my wineglass very slowly and very calmly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it with a slight smile on my face, and I watched as Marcus's expression shifted from satisfaction to confusion, to something that looked almost like fear. "Before you continue, Marcus," I said, my voice steady even though I could feel rage burning in my chest, "there's something everyone should know." I turned my phone screen toward the table, showing them the draft email I had prepared. The email that was addressed to every single executive at Marcus's company, including the CEO, the CFO, and the head of human resources. Marcus's face drained of all color. "Sarah, wait, don't. We can talk about this." "Now you want to talk?" I asked, and I could hear the edge in my own voice, sharp as broken glass. "After you just called me pathetic in front of everyone? After you stood up in the middle of this restaurant and announced you're done with me, like I'm some expired carton of milk you're throwing away?" His colleagues were looking between us, completely confused. David had lowered his phone. Tom looked uncomfortable. Kevin was staring at his plate. "Sarah. Please," Marcus said, and his voice was shaking now. "Don't do this. We can go outside and talk about this privately. Privately? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You didn't want privacy when you planned this little performance. You didn't want privacy when you invited all your friends to witness my breakdown. So why should I give you privacy now? I looked at the faces around the table, at these people who had been complicit in Marcus's plan, whether they knew the full extent of it or not. This email, I said, holding up my phone, contains evidence of Marcus's 8-month affair with his assistant, Jessica. It includes photos of them together on business trips. It includes romantic emails. It includes hotel receipts and dinner receipts and jewelry receipts. Everything I need to prove that my husband has been cheating on me for the better part of a year. Emily gasped. Rachel's eyes went wide. Jennifer looked at Marcus with something like disgust on her face. But I wasn't finished. It also contains evidence that Marcus has been embezzling company funds to pay for this affair. $127,000, to be exact. Stolen over 18 months through fake vendor invoices and shell companies. Money that he used to buy his mistress jewelry, to take her on vacation, to rent hotel rooms for their afternoon encounters. Marcus was shaking his head frantically. That's not true. She's lying. She's unstable. This is exactly why I can't stay married to her. Really? I asked, and my voice was cold now, so cold I barely recognized it. Should I show them the spreadsheet I created, the one that tracks every fraudulent transaction? The one that includes account numbers and dates and amounts? I work in accounting, Marcus. Did you forget that? Did you really think I wouldn't notice the patterns? His boss, Richard, who was sitting at the end of the table, leaned forward. Marcus, what is she talking about? Nothing, Marcus said quickly. She's making this up. She's angry because I'm ending our marriage, so she's trying to destroy me. Am I making up the photos too? I asked. The ones where you and Jessica are kissing on the beach in Maui? The ones where she's wearing the diamond bracelet you told me was a work bonus? The ones where you're together in a hotel room that was charged to a company credit card as a client entertainment expense? The table was completely silent now. Even the people at nearby tables had stopped talking, drawn in by the drama unfolding. Marcus looked at me with something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. Sarah, he said, and his voice cracked. Please, I'm begging you, don't send that email. Why? I asked. Why shouldn't I? You just called me pathetic in front of all these people. You orchestrated this entire evening to humiliate me. You wanted everyone to see me break down so you could point to it later and say, see? I told you she was unstable. I told you she was emotional. I was right to leave her. But I'm not going to break down, Marcus. I'm not going to give you that satisfaction. My finger hovered over the send button. One click, and his career would be over. One click, and criminal charges would follow. One click, and the life he'd so carefully built would come crashing down. Please, he whispered. And I swear I could see tears forming in his eyes. I'll do anything. Name your price. Just don't send that. And that's when I realized something. This was never about revenge. This was about taking back my power. This was about showing him and everyone else at this table that I was not the pathetic, weak woman he'd spent 5 years trying to make me believe I was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how I got to this moment, because you need to understand what it took for me to become the woman holding that phone. I met Marcus 5 years ago at a networking event downtown. I was 24, fresh out of college with my accounting degree, working at a mid-sized firm and trying to build my career. He was 27, confident and charming, working in project management at a pharmaceutical distribution company. When he walked up to me at the networking mixer and started talking, I felt like I was the only person in the room. He asked about my career goals, my dreams, my aspirations. He listened intently, nodded in all the right places, asked follow-up questions that made me feel heard and valued. I thought he was perfect. Our first real date was at a coffee shop near Pike Place Market. We talked for hours. He told me about his ambitions, how he wanted to climb the corporate ladder, how he was going to be a director by 35 and a VP by 40. I told him I loved numbers, loved the precision of accounting, loved finding patterns in data. He said he found my intelligence attractive. He said most women he dated were intimidated by his success, but I seemed like someone who could match it. I should have heard the warning in those words. Most women were intimidated, as if their supposed intimidation was their failure, not his arrogance. But I was young and flattered and I didn't see it. The first year was intense. He pursued me aggressively, texting me constantly, wanting to see me every free moment, making grand romantic gestures. He took me to expensive dinners, he bought me flowers, he introduced me to his friends and his family. He talked about our future together like it was already decided, and I got swept up in it, in the feeling of being wanted so completely. Looking back now, I can see that his intensity wasn't passion, it was possession. He wasn't falling in love with me. He was acquiring me, like I was another achievement to add to his resume. Successful career, check. Beautiful girlfriend, check. Perfect life image, check. By year 2, things started to shift. It was subtle at first. He'd make little comments about my appearance. Maybe you should wear your hair down more often. I like it better that way. That dress is a little tight, don't you think? You might want to go easy on the dessert. I told myself he was just being honest. That couples should be able to be honest with each other. But honesty and criticism aren't the same thing. Honesty is kind. Criticism disguised as honesty is cruel. Then he started commenting on my career. You're still at that same firm? Don't you think you should be more ambitious? You're never going to make real money there. Why are you working late on that project? It's not like they're going to promote you. Your boss is taking advantage of you. You let people walk all over you. Every comment chipped away at my confidence. Every critique made me question myself. Was I ambitious enough? Was I letting people take advantage of me? Was I doing something wrong? No, I wasn't. But Marcus needed me to believe I was, because a confident woman might have left him. An insecure woman would stay and keep trying to earn his approval. And then he started in on my friends. Maya is so negative. Every time you hang out with her, you come back in a bad mood. Your college friends are holding you back. They're not going anywhere in life. Do we really have to go to another one of your friends' parties? I'd rather spend time just the two of us. At first, I defended my friends. I told him he was wrong about Maya, that she was supportive and caring. I told him my college friends were important to me. But Marcus had a way of wearing you down. He'd bring it up again and again until it was easier to just cancel plans than to deal with his disappointment and passive-aggressive comments. Looking back now, I can see exactly what he was doing. He was isolating me, piece by piece, comment by comment. He was cutting me off from everyone who might have told me to run. And it worked. By year 3, I barely saw my friends anymore. I'd stopped going to my book club. I'd stopped having girls' nights. I'd moved into an apartment closer to Marcus's office, even though it was farther from my own job, because he said it made more sense logistically. My life had become shaped entirely around his schedule, his preferences, his needs. I remember one night, about 3 years into our relationship, I was supposed to meet Maya for dinner. We'd had it scheduled for weeks. But that afternoon, Marcus called me at work and said he'd had a terrible day and really needed me to come home and just be with him, so I canceled on Maya. Again, she texted me, "Sarah, this is the 3rd time this month. Is everything okay?" And I lied. I told her work was just really busy and I was exhausted, because admitting the truth, that I'd canceled because my boyfriend needed me, felt pathetic. It felt weak. It felt like admitting I'd lost myself somewhere along the way. When he proposed, 18 months into our relationship, he did it at his company's holiday party, in front of 200 people. He got down on one knee, right there in the middle of the ballroom, with everyone watching, phones out recording, and he asked me to marry me. What was I supposed to say? How could I say anything but yes with all those people watching, all those cameras recording, all that expectation hanging in the air? So I said yes, and everyone cheered, and Marcus slipped the ring on my finger and kissed me, and I smiled for all the photos, and I told myself this was what love looked like. But even then, a small voice in the back of my mind was whispering that something was wrong. The proposal wasn't about us. It wasn't an intimate moment between two people in love. It was a performance, a spectacle. Something Marcus could point to and say, "Look what I did. Look how romantic I am." The engagement period was when things got really bad. Marcus's control over my life intensified. He wanted to be involved in every decision I made. What I wore, where I went, who I saw, what I spent money on. He framed it as caring, as being invested in our future together, but it felt suffocating. The wedding planning was a nightmare. I wanted something small and intimate. Marcus wanted 300 guests. I wanted a simple ceremony at a local garden. Marcus wanted the most expensive hotel ballroom in Seattle, because that's where people in our professional circle expect to celebrate. I wanted to wear my grandmother's vintage dress. Marcus wanted me in something modern and expensive that would photograph well. Every single decision became a battle, and Marcus had a way of making me feel unreasonable for having preferences. "This isn't just your wedding, Sarah. It's our wedding. You're being selfish." My parents are paying for half of this. They deserve a say. You're making this so difficult. Why can't you just be flexible? So I gave in. Again and again and again. I gave in until I wasn't even sure what I wanted anymore. I just knew I wanted the fighting to stop. I remember one particularly brutal argument about the guest list. I wanted to invite some of my extended family members, cousins I'd grown up with, aunts and uncles who had been important in my life. Marcus said we couldn't afford to invite them because we needed those seats for his business contacts. I pointed out that his parents were paying for half the wedding, so we could probably accommodate my family. He looked at me with this cold expression and said, "Sarah, your family is, how do I put this kindly? They're not the kind of people who will help our future. My contacts are investments. Your cousins are just taking up space." I should have ended the engagement right then. I should have thrown the ring in his face and walked out, but I didn't. Because by that point, Marcus had convinced me that I was lucky to have him, that I should be grateful he was willing to overlook my flaws, my lack of ambition, my mediocre family, my ordinary life. He'd spent 3 years breaking down my self-worth so completely that I actually believed I was the problem. My best friend Maya pulled me aside 2 months before the wedding. We were at a coffee shop, supposedly looking at centerpiece options, but she wasn't looking at the catalog I'd brought. She was looking at me with concern all over her face. "Sarah," she said carefully, "are you happy?" "Of course I'm happy," I said automatically. "I'm getting married." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you're happy. You, Sarah. Not bride Sarah, not Marcus's fiancée, Sarah. Just you." I remember staring down at my latte, watching the foam dissolve into the coffee, and I couldn't answer her. Because the truth was, I didn't remember the last time I'd felt genuinely happy. I felt busy, overwhelmed, anxious about pleasing Marcus, worried about doing everything right, but happy? I couldn't remember what that felt like anymore. "He loves me," I finally said, like that explained everything. Maya reached across the table and took my hand. "Does he though? Because from where I'm sitting, he loves having someone who does everything he wants." "That's not the same thing." I pulled my hand away. "You don't understand him like I do. He's just stressed with work. The wedding planning has been hard on both of us." "Sarah, I don't want to talk about this," I said firmly, and I didn't, because if I let myself think too hard about Maya's question, I was afraid of what I might realize. The wedding happened. I walked down the aisle in the expensive dress I didn't choose, in the hotel ballroom I didn't want, in front of 300 people I barely knew. Marcus looked handsome in his tuxedo. He said his vows with perfect delivery. We danced our first dance to a song his mother picked, and when people asked me later if it was the happiest day of my life, I lied and said yes. The truth is, I felt numb through most of it, like I was watching someone else's wedding, someone else's life. I smiled for photos. I thanked guests for coming. I cut the cake and threw the bouquet and did all the things you're supposed to do. But I felt disconnected from all of it, like I was performing a role rather than living my life. Our honeymoon was in Hawaii, and even that became another way for Marcus to exert control. He planned every single day without asking my input. When I suggested we skip one of his scheduled activities and just relax on the beach, he got annoyed and said I wasn't being appreciative of all the planning he'd done. So I went snorkeling when I wanted to read a book. I went on a helicopter tour when I wanted to sleep in. I smiled and pretended I was having the time of my life. The first 2 years of marriage were more of the same, just intensified. Marcus got promoted to senior project manager. He started working longer hours, going on more business trips, spending more time with his colleagues. I kept working at my firm, kept doing good work, but Marcus made it clear he didn't respect my career the way I respected his. "It's cute that you enjoy your little accounting job," he'd say. "But let's be real, my income is what's actually supporting our lifestyle." He wasn't wrong. He made twice what I made. But the way he said it, the way he used it to diminish everything I did, that cut deep. And it made me feel like I owed him something, like I should be grateful he was willing to support my little career, like I didn't have the right to complain about anything because he was the primary breadwinner. I started making myself smaller. I stopped sharing stories about work because he'd either ignore them or point out how his work was more complex. I stopped suggesting restaurants or activities because he'd just override my choices anyway. I stopped arguing when he made decisions without consulting me because I was tired of fighting battles I always lost. The worst part was how gradual it all was. If Marcus had been obviously abusive from the start, I would have left, but he wasn't. He was subtle. A comment here, a critique there, a gradual erosion of my autonomy and self-worth that happened so slowly I didn't notice until I'd lost myself completely. Maya noticed, of course. She always noticed. She started calling me more, texting me, trying to get me to come out for drinks or dinner, but Marcus would get annoyed when I made plans without him, so I stopped saying yes to her invitations. It was easier to avoid the conflict. I remember one night, about 4 years into our relationship, Maya showed up at my apartment unannounced. Marcus was on a business trip, and she'd brought wine and takeout. "I miss you," she said simply. "I miss my best friend." And I started crying, right there in my kitchen, because I missed me too. I missed the woman I used to be, the woman who had opinions and dreams and a personality that wasn't entirely defined by her relationship with a man who didn't even respect her. "Why do you stay with him?" Maya asked gently. "Sarah, you're miserable. Anyone can see it." "I'm not miserable," I protested weakly. "I'm just adjusting. Marriage is hard. It's about compromise." "Compromise goes both ways," Maya said. "What has Marcus compromised on? Ever?" I couldn't answer that, because Marcus didn't compromise. He won, and I conceded, and that's what he called partnership. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet, because leaving would mean admitting that I'd wasted 5 years of my life. It would mean admitting that everyone who'd had concerns about Marcus was right. It would mean starting over at 30, alone, and that terrified me more than staying. So I stayed, and I kept shrinking, and I kept telling myself that this was normal, that all marriages had difficulties, that I just needed to try harder to make him happy. And then, 2 weeks before that Friday dinner, I found the credit card statement. Marcus was in the shower, and his phone was on the kitchen counter. It buzzed with a notification, and I glanced at it without thinking. It was an alert from our credit card company about a large purchase. I picked up the phone, intending to just check what it was, and I saw it, Fairmont Olympic Hotel, Seattle, $847. We hadn't stayed at the Fairmont. I would have remembered. It's one of the nicest hotels in the city. My hands were shaking as I opened our credit card account. Marcus and I had always had transparent finances, joint checking, joint savings, joint credit cards. We'd agreed on that early in our marriage, so I had access to everything. And what I found made my blood run cold. There were charges going back months. Hotels I'd never stayed at, restaurants where we'd never eaten, jewelry stores I'd never visited, flower deliveries I'd never received, a diamond bracelet from Tiffany for $3,200, dinner for 2 at Canlis for $580, 2 tickets to a show at the Paramount I didn't attend. On and on and on. A trail of expenses that told the story of a relationship I wasn't part of. I sat on the kitchen floor with Marcus's phone in my hands, scrolling through months of charges, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. 5 years of my life. 5 years of making myself smaller, quieter, more accommodating. 5 years of being told I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't supportive enough, wasn't good enough, and the whole time, he was having an affair. The betrayal was devastating, but what hurt almost more was the realization that while I'd been shrinking myself to fit into his life, he'd been building an entirely separate life that didn't include me at all. When Marcus came out of the shower, I was still on the floor. He saw his phone in my hands and froze. "Sarah," he said carefully, "what are you doing?" "The Fairmont Olympic," I said, my voice hollow. $847. When were we there, Marcus? His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, guilt, calculation, and then anger. "You went through my phone? That's a violation of privacy, Sarah. That's not okay." The audacity of him trying to make me the bad guy in this moment almost made me laugh. "When were we there?" I repeated, each word like a stone. He tried to say it was a work expense he'd accidentally put on our personal card. He tried to say it was a mistake. He tried to say I was overreacting. But I had already seen too much. I'd seen the pattern. I'd seen the evidence. And once you see something that clearly, you can't unsee it. "Who is she?" I asked. "There's no she. You're being paranoid." "Marcus, I'm an accountant. I see patterns for a living. There's a she. Now tell me who she is, or I'll start calling hotels and asking." He finally admitted it. "Her name is Jessica. She's my assistant. It's nothing serious. It just happened." "I'm sorry." "Nothing serious. It just happened," as if 8 months of deliberate choices could be dismissed as a cosmic accident. I told him I needed time to think. I told him I was going to stay with Maya for a few days. He didn't argue. He looked almost relieved, which should have been another red flag, but I was too devastated to notice. At Maya's apartment, I broke down completely. All the emotion I'd been suppressing for years came pouring out. I cried until I couldn't breathe. I screamed into pillows. I felt like my entire life had been built on a foundation of lies, and now it was crumbling beneath me. But Maya, bless her, she didn't let me wallow for long. After I'd cried myself out, she sat me down at her kitchen table and said, "Okay, now we gather evidence." "What?" "Sarah, you work in accounting. You're trained to find patterns in data, to track money, to uncover inconsistencies, so let's do that. Let's find out exactly what Marcus has been doing." She was right. The pain and betrayal were overwhelming, but underneath that, there was something else starting to burn. Anger. Pure, white-hot anger. So I started investigating. I went through every credit card statement from the past 2 years. I made a spreadsheet tracking every suspicious charge. The patterns were damning. Every Thursday afternoon, a hotel charge. Every Friday evening, dinner for 2 at expensive restaurants, jewelry purchases that coincided with his business trips. I logged into Marcus's laptop when he was at work. He never locked it, never thought I'd have reason to look. And that's when I found his email correspondence. That's when I found Jessica. Jessica Chen, his 4-year-old assistant. Fresh out of college, eager to please, hired 8 months ago. The affair had started almost immediately. Their emails began professionally enough, but within weeks they'd crossed every line. He was calling her beautiful and incredible. She was calling him amazing, and the best thing that ever happened to her. They were meeting at hotels during lunch breaks. They were going on business trips together, that weren't actually business trips at all. He was promising her promotions, special projects, a future together. A future together. I found an email he'd sent her just 3 days before I discovered everything. "Soon, I promise. Once I'm done with Sarah, we can finally be together for real. I'm just waiting for the right moment to end things. She's becoming a problem, but I'll handle it." The right moment to end things, like our 5-year relationship was a business deal he needed to close properly. Like I was an inconvenience he needed to handle, and I was becoming a problem. Because what? Because I existed? Because I had the audacity to be his wife? Reading those words, I felt something shift inside me. The devastation was still there, but it was being joined by a cold, calculated fury. He thought I was a problem he needed to handle? Fine, let's see who handles whom. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what I found in his financial files. See, my training in accounting made me look deeper than just credit card statements. I started examining his work expenses, the things he was getting reimbursed for by his company. And that's when I noticed the patterns. There were invoices from vendors I couldn't find any trace of online. I googled company names and found nothing. No websites, no business listings, no LinkedIn pages. These companies didn't exist. There were consulting fees for services that didn't seem to match his project scope. Marcus worked in pharmaceutical distribution, but he was expensing consultants for IT services, marketing research, legal review, things that made no sense for his actual job. There were reimbursements for client dinners that happened at the same restaurants where he'd taken Jessica. Same dates, same amounts, but submitted as business expenses. The numbers didn't add up. So I dug deeper. I spent 3 days going through every file I could access, cross-referencing invoice numbers, checking account details, tracking payment patterns, and what I uncovered made me physically sick. Marcus had been creating fake vendor invoices for over a year. He'd set up shell companies with legitimate-sounding names: Northwest Consulting Partners, Pacific Business Solutions, Cascade Strategic Services. He'd submitted invoices for services that were never performed, approved the payments himself since he had that authority in his role, and the money would go to bank accounts he controlled. Then he'd transfer it to his personal accounts and use it to fund his affair. The total amount was staggering: $127,000 over 18 months. My husband wasn't just a cheater, he was a thief. I sat there staring at my computer screen, at the evidence I'd compiled, and I realized something. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me as a husband, he'd betrayed his company, his colleagues, everyone who trusted him. He was a thief and a liar and a fraud. He'd stolen over $100,000 to fund an affair with a woman young enough to be fresh out of college, and he'd called me pathetic. That's when I started planning. If Marcus wanted to end our marriage, fine. He'd given me plenty of reason to want that too. But he wasn't going to get to control the narrative. He wasn't going to get to paint himself as the good guy who had to escape his difficult wife. He wasn't going to get to rewrite history and make me the villain. I spent the next several days methodically compiling everything into one comprehensive file. Every email between him and Jessica, organized chronologically. Every suspicious credit card charge with corresponding receipts where I could find them. Every fake vendor invoice with analysis showing why the vendors didn't exist. Every piece of evidence that showed exactly who Marcus really was. Then I created a draft email. I spent hours crafting it, making sure the tone was professional, factual, unassailable. I addressed it to every executive at his company. The CEO, the CFO, the head of HR, the legal counsel, the compliance officer. I attached the evidence files with clear labels. I wrote a brief, clinical explanation of what I'd discovered. And I saved it as a draft, ready to send at a moment's notice. I didn't know exactly when Marcus was planning to end our marriage, but I knew it was coming. I could feel it in the way he'd been acting, distant and secretive, like he was preparing for something. So I waited, phone loaded with evidence, ready for whenever he made his move. The waiting was excruciating. Every day I woke up wondering if this would be the day. Every conversation with Marcus felt loaded with double meaning. He'd ask me about my day, and I'd wonder if he was gathering ammunition for his exit. He'd comment on dinner, and I'd wonder if he was rehearsing the speech he'd give about why I wasn't good enough. But I played along. I acted normal. I went to work, came home, made dinner, watched TV with him like nothing was wrong. I let him think I was oblivious, that I hadn't discovered anything, that I was still the compliant, controllable wife he'd spent 5 years creating. And then he called me on Thursday night, the night before that Friday dinner. "Hey babe," he said, his voice falsely cheerful. "I know we've been having a rough time lately, but I want to try to reconnect. How about dinner tomorrow night with some of my work friends? Nothing fancy, just a chance to relax and spend time together." I almost laughed at the transparency of it. This was his moment. This was when he was going to end things. And he was inviting witnesses to see it happen. "Sure," I said calmly. "That sounds nice. What should I wear?" "Something elegant," he said. "Maybe that navy dress you bought last month?" Of course. He wanted me to look good for his big finale. He wanted the optics to be right. He wanted me dressed up and pretty so the humiliation would be even more complete. "I'll see you tomorrow," I said, and hung up. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed next to my husband, this man who I'd given 5 years of my life to, this man who was planning to humiliate me in public, and I felt nothing but cold fury. He'd underestimated me so completely. He'd assumed I'd be too emotional, too devastated, too pathetic to do anything strategic. He had no idea what was coming. I spent that sleepless night going over my plan again and again, making sure I had everything I needed, checking that the email was ready, rehearsing what I'd say, and how I'd say it. I wanted to be calm, composed, unbreakable. I wanted to show him that I was not the weak woman he'd spent 5 years trying to create. The next morning, Marcus left for work early. He kissed me on the forehead like he always did, said he'd see me at 7, told me he was looking forward to dinner. The casual cruelty of it was staggering. He was going to spend the day at work, probably messaging Jessica, probably finalizing his plans for my public destruction, and he was acting like everything was normal. I went to work too, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept checking my phone, waiting for, I didn't know what, some sign that the evening was really going to happen. Around 3 o'clock, Maya texted me. "How are you holding up?" "Tonight's the night," I typed back. "I can feel it. You ready?" "I'm ready. Call me after. I don't care what time." "I will." The next evening, I got dressed carefully. I did my makeup with precision, each stroke of mascara an act of armor. I wore the navy dress he'd requested. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked calm, she looked composed, she looked nothing like the anxious, diminished version of myself I'd become over the past 5 years. "You look beautiful," Marcus said when I came downstairs, and I could hear the guilt in his voice. He knew what he was about to do. He knew he was going to hurt me, and some part of him felt bad about it, but not bad enough to stop. We drove to the restaurant in silence. Marcus kept glancing at me like he was trying to gauge my mood. I just stared out the window, my phone in my purse, my plan ready to execute. When we walked into the restaurant and I saw all his friends already there, I knew. This was it. This was the moment he'd been planning. David with his phone ready, Tom and Kevin and their wives, all positioned to witness my breakdown. This was Marcus's show, and I was the unwilling star. We sat down. We ordered. We made small talk. I could feel the tension building around the table. Emily kept giving me sympathetic looks. Rachel wouldn't make eye contact. Jennifer seemed uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. They knew something was coming. And I waited. And then Marcus stood up and said those words. "I'm done with her, she's pathetic, I can't do this anymore." And everyone stared at me, waiting for me to fall apart. But I didn't fall apart. I'd already fallen apart at Maya's apartment 2 weeks ago. I'd already cried every tear I had to cry. I'd already felt the devastation and the betrayal and the humiliation. I'd already processed everything I needed to process. What I felt now was clarity. Cold, sharp, perfect clarity. So I pulled out my phone. I showed him the email. I watched his face change from satisfaction to terror. And I felt powerful in a way I hadn't felt in 5 years. "Please, Sarah," he was begging now, and people at other tables were starting to stare. "I love you, I made a mistake, don't send that email, please." "You love me?" I asked, and I could hear the contempt in my own voice. "You just told everyone in this restaurant that you're done with me, that I'm pathetic. And now you love me?" I was angry. I didn't mean it. "We can work through this." I looked at David, who had lowered his phone. I looked at Tom and Kevin, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at their wives, who were staring at Marcus like they'd never really seen him before. "You know what, Marcus?" I said, standing up. "I'm not going to send this email." His relief was immediate and visible. "Not tonight, anyway," I continued, and his face fell again. "Because your boss can investigate himself when I file my report with HR on Monday morning, and when my attorney files for divorce citing adultery, and when the forensic accountant I hired presents his findings to your company's CFO." Richard, Marcus's boss, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, spoke up. "Sarah, what exactly are you accusing Marcus of?" I turned to him. "Embezzlement, Richard. $127,000 over 18 months, fake vendor invoices, shell companies, all documented, all traceable. Your company has a whistleblower hotline, doesn't it? I'll be calling it first thing Monday morning." Marcus was shaking his head frantically. "She's lying, she's unstable, she's—" "Stop," I said. And my voice was so cold it cut through his protests. "Just stop. You wanted everyone to see me as pathetic. You wanted them to watch me break down. You choreographed this entire evening to humiliate me, to make yourself look like the good guy ending things with his difficult wife. But instead, they got to see you, the real you, a liar, a cheat, a thief, a man who begged and cried and showed everyone exactly who he really is." I picked up my purse and looked at the faces around the table one last time. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. And I walked out. My hands didn't start shaking until I was in my car. That's when the adrenaline finally hit, when I realized what I'd just done. I'd exposed him. In front of everyone, I'd taken back my power. And it felt incredible. I drove straight to Maya's apartment. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me inside. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I told her about his announcement, about pulling out my phone, about his begging, about walking out, and she listened to every word with this fierce pride on her face. "That's my girl," she said when I finished. "That's the Sarah I've been waiting to see for 5 years." We stayed up until 3 in the morning, going over everything that happened, processing it all. Maya kept hugging me and telling me how proud she was, and slowly, as the adrenaline wore off, I started to feel the full weight of what had just occurred. My marriage was over. 5 years of my life were ending, but instead of feeling devastated, I felt free. Like I'd been carrying a massive weight, and had finally set it down. The next few days were a blur. Saturday morning, I met with a divorce attorney that Maya had helped me find. Her name was Patricia, and she was exactly the kind of no-nonsense professional I needed. She took copies of everything I'd compiled, and assured me that I had an extremely strong case. "With evidence of adultery this clear, plus the financial crimes, you're in an excellent position," she said. "We'll file for divorce citing fault, and we'll make sure you get what you're entitled to from the marital assets." Sunday, I moved my belongings out of the apartment Marcus and I shared. He wasn't there, which I was grateful for. I didn't want to see him, didn't want to hear his excuses or his anger or his attempts to manipulate me back into his control. I just wanted my things and my freedom. Maya and 2 of my other friends helped me pack. It was shocking how little I actually cared about. So much of the apartment was Marcus's choices, Marcus's style, Marcus's preferences. My own possessions fit into just a few boxes. That should have told me everything I needed to know about how much of myself I'd lost. Moving into Maya's spare room felt like stepping back into my own life. She'd kept it ready for me, she said. She'd been hoping for years that I'd finally leave Marcus, and she wanted to make sure I had a safe place to land when I did. Monday morning, I called the whistleblower hotline at Marcus's company. I gave them my name, explained my relationship to Marcus, and provided a detailed summary of what I'd discovered. They took my report seriously and assured me they'd begin an immediate investigation. I sent them all the evidence files that afternoon. By Monday evening, Marcus had been suspended from work pending the investigation. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was panicking, calling everyone he knew, trying to do damage control, but it was too late. The evidence was too clear, too comprehensive, too damning. Tuesday, I officially filed for divorce. Patricia submitted all the paperwork, including the evidence of adultery and the financial crimes. Marcus was served the papers at his parents' house, where he'd apparently been staying since Friday night. He tried to call me dozens of times. He left voicemails that ranged from angry to desperate to manipulative. "This is your fault, Sarah. You destroyed me. You could have handled this privately, but you had to make a scene. Please, Sarah, I'm begging you. Think about what you're doing. We can still fix this. I can't believe you're being so vindictive. This isn't like you." But it was like me, the real me, the me who existed before Marcus spent 5 years convincing me I was weak. I didn't respond to a single message. Wednesday, the company confirmed the embezzlement. Their investigation had uncovered everything I'd found and more. Marcus had been stealing for longer than I'd realized, and the total amount was closer to $150,000. They terminated his employment immediately and referred the case to law enforcement for criminal prosecution. Jessica was fired too, for ethics violations, and for participating in an intimate relationship with her supervisor. Apparently, company policy was very clear about that. She tried to claim she didn't know about the embezzlement, but her emails with Marcus showed she'd at least suspected where the money for their extravagant dates was coming from. Thursday, I heard through the grapevine that Marcus's friends were distancing themselves. David, who had been so ready to record my breakdown, suddenly stopped returning Marcus's calls. Tom and Kevin claimed they'd had no idea what Marcus was really like. Their wives were apparently furious that they'd been complicit in the attempted humiliation of another woman. The story spread through Seattle's professional community like wildfire. It had everything: public betrayal, hidden affair, corporate crime, dramatic reversal. The man who had tried to publicly humiliate his wife had instead exposed himself as a criminal and a fraud. The irony was almost poetic. People I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out. Colleagues from work, old friends from college, extended family members. Everyone wanted to know if I was okay, wanted to offer support, wanted to tell me they'd always thought something was off about Marcus. Some of the responses annoyed me. Where were all these people when I was slowly losing myself? Why didn't anyone say anything when they saw me shrinking? But Maya helped me understand. "They probably tried, Sarah," she said gently. "But you weren't ready to hear it. You would have defended him and pulled away. Sometimes people have to see things for themselves." She was right. If someone had told me a year ago that Marcus was manipulative and cruel, I would have made excuses for him. I would have explained that they didn't understand him, that he was just stressed, that I was being too sensitive. I had to see it for myself, and more than that, I had to be ready to do something about it. The following weeks were a strange mix of pain and liberation. I was grieving the end of my marriage, the loss of 5 years, the death of the future I'd imagined, but I was also rediscovering myself, remembering who I was before Marcus, finding parts of myself I thought were gone forever. I started therapy with a woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in emotional abuse and manipulation. Our first session, she asked me to describe my relationship with Marcus, and I spent 2 hours talking. At the end, she looked at me with such compassion and said, "Sarah, you were in an emotionally abusive relationship. What you experienced has a name. It's called coercive control." Hearing that was both validating and devastating. Validating because it meant I wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't making something out of nothing. Devastating because it meant I'd spent 5 years being systematically controlled and hadn't even realized it. Dr. Chen helped me understand the patterns, how Marcus had isolated me from my support system, how he'd gradually eroded my confidence and autonomy, how he'd used money and social status to maintain power over me, how he'd made me doubt my own perception of reality. Emotional abuse is insidious, she explained. It's not loud or obvious like physical violence. It's quiet and gradual. It happens so slowly that you don't notice you're losing yourself until you're almost gone. Through therapy, I started to see how deep the damage went. It wasn't just about the affair or the embezzlement or the public humiliation. It was about 5 years of being told, in 1,000 subtle ways, that I wasn't good enough, that my opinions didn't matter, that my feelings were inconvenient, that my existence was something Marcus tolerated rather than celebrated. But I also started to heal. Slowly, painfully, I started to remember who I was. The woman who had strong opinions and big dreams. The woman who was confident and capable. The woman who existed before Marcus convinced her she was pathetic. 3 months after that Friday dinner, Marcus pleaded guilty to embezzlement in exchange for a reduced sentence. His attorney had advised him that going to trial would be pointless given the overwhelming evidence. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison and required to pay full restitution to his former employer. His professional licenses were revoked. His reputation was destroyed. The career he'd valued more than our marriage, more than his integrity, more than me, was over. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No satisfaction, no pity, no anger, just nothing. He had become irrelevant to me. His consequences were his own doing. I was too busy rebuilding my life to care about his. And I was rebuilding. I got promoted at work. My boss pulled me aside and told me that my analytical skills in uncovering the fraud had impressed everyone. They'd had no idea I was capable of that level of investigation. They offered me a senior position with a significant raise and more responsibility. I accepted immediately. I moved into my own apartment, a beautiful one-bedroom downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the water. It was smaller than the apartment I'd shared with Marcus, but it was entirely mine. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every choice reflected my taste, not his. Walking through that space, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. I reconnected with all the friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Maya, of course, was there through everything, but Elena flew in from Boston to spend a weekend with me. My book club friends welcomed me back with open arms. My college roommate started calling me every Sunday. All these relationships I'd neglected, all these connections I'd let weaken, they were still there, waiting for me to come back. The divorce was finalized 5 months after I filed. Marcus tried to fight it initially, but his attorney advised him that contesting a divorce while in prison for embezzlement wasn't a great look. We split the marital assets, with me getting a larger share given his fault in ending the marriage. I used my portion to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a car. Small victories, but they were mine. 6 months after that Friday dinner, I was having brunch with Maya and some other friends at a restaurant near the waterfront. It was a beautiful Saturday morning in April, and I was laughing at something Elena had said about her disastrous attempt at online dating, when I looked across the table and realized something. I was happy. Genuinely, completely happy. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't arranging my emotions around someone else's expectations. I wasn't monitoring my words to avoid conflict. I wasn't making myself smaller to make someone else comfortable. I was just myself. "You okay?" Maya asked, noticing my expression. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. "I'm really okay." That evening, I was back in my apartment, curled up on my couch with a book, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "I heard what happened with Marcus. You did the right thing. I'm proud of you. Jennifer." Jennifer. Kevin's wife. The woman who had been at that dinner, who had watched everything unfold. I smiled and sent back a simple response, "Thank you." More messages came over the following weeks. Emily apologized for not seeing what was happening sooner. Rachel asked if we could meet for coffee, saying she'd been thinking about her own marriage and needed advice. Even some of Marcus's colleagues reached out to express support and admiration for how I'd handled everything. Apparently, Marcus's behavior had been an open secret for a while. The way he talked down to people, the way he treated assistants and junior staff, the way he manipulated situations to make himself look good. People had noticed. They'd just never said anything. Because that's what people do. They watch and they notice and they stay silent, until something forces the truth into the open. Until someone like me refuses to be silent anymore. A year after that Friday dinner, almost to the day, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference in Seattle. They wanted me to talk about finding your voice in professional settings, about standing up for yourself, about recognizing your worth. The irony of being asked to speak about these things, when just a year ago I'd lost my voice completely, wasn't lost on me. I accepted the invitation. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of women, I told them my story. Not all of it, not the painful details that were still tender, but the core of it. I told them about the moment my husband tried to break me publicly, about how I'd gathered evidence instead of falling apart, about how I'd refused to play the role he'd assigned me. He called me pathetic, I said into the microphone, my voice steady and strong. He wanted everyone to believe I was weak, emotional, unstable. He wanted to control the narrative of our ending. He wanted to be the hero of a story where I was the villain. But here's what he didn't understand. You can't break someone who refuses to break. You can't write someone else's story when they hold the pen. And you can't make someone believe they're worthless when they finally remember their worth. The applause was thunderous. But more than the applause, it was the faces I saw. Women nodding, some crying, some with expressions of recognition that told me they understood exactly what I was talking about. They'd been there too, or they were there now, in relationships that made them feel small. After my speech, a young woman came up to me. She looked like she'd been crying. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm in a relationship like that. My boyfriend, he makes me feel small. He criticizes everything I do. He's isolated me from my friends. And I've been too afraid to leave because I don't want to be alone." I took her hands in mine. "You're not afraid of being alone," I said gently. "You're afraid of who you might be without him telling you who to be. And let me tell you something. That person you're afraid of meeting? She's incredible, she's powerful, she's everything he's afraid you'll become. Because men like that, they don't want weak women. They want strong women they can convince are weak. There's a difference." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "How did you do it? How did you become so strong?" "I didn't become strong," I said, and I realized as I said it that it was true. I already was strong, I'd just forgotten, and it took him trying to destroy me publicly for me to remember. But you don't have to wait for that moment. You can remember right now. You can choose yourself right now. That conversation stayed with me for days. Because it made me realize something important. Marcus didn't make me weak, he just convinced me I was. And the moment I stopped believing his lies, the moment I saw myself clearly again, everything changed. Now, sitting here telling you this story, I can honestly say that Friday dinner was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because I wanted my marriage to end. Not because I enjoyed the pain of betrayal or the devastation of discovering I'd wasted 5 years of my life on someone who didn't value me. But because it forced me to wake up. It forced me to see what I'd been accepting, what I'd been tolerating, what I'd been allowing myself to become. Marcus spent 5 years trying to make me believe I was pathetic. He succeeded for a while. I believed him. I internalized his criticisms. I accepted his assessment of my worth. I made myself smaller and quieter and more accommodating until I barely recognized myself anymore. But when he stood up in that restaurant and said those words out loud, when he tried to humiliate me in front of witnesses, when he orchestrated my public destruction with cameras rolling and friends watching, he gave me a gift. He showed me, in the clearest possible terms, exactly who he was. Not the charming man I'd met at a networking event, not the romantic who proposed in front of 200 people, not the husband who claimed to love me, the real Marcus, the cruel, calculated, manipulative man who valued his pride more than my humanity. And once I saw him that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. And once I couldn't unsee it, I couldn't stay. And once I couldn't stay, I had to remember who I was before him. And remembering who I was before him meant remembering that I was never pathetic. I was never weak. I was never the problem. I was just with someone who benefited from me believing I was. So yes, he tried to break me. He called me pathetic. He wanted me to crumble in front of everyone. He invited witnesses to document my destruction. He had his friend recording, ready to capture my breakdown, ready to use it as evidence of everything he'd been saying about me. But I pulled out my phone instead. I showed him I'd been 10 steps ahead the entire time. I exposed his lies, his theft, his betrayal. I let everyone see the truth about who he really was. I took back my power. I took back my narrative. I took back my life. And that is the response he never expected. Today, Marcus is somewhere trying to rebuild a life from the ruins of his own making. I heard he got out of prison last month. I heard he's working some low-level job, nothing like the career he had before. I heard he moved to a different state, trying to escape his reputation. I genuinely hope he learns something from what happened. I hope he becomes a better person, not for me, because I don't care anymore, but for whoever comes after me. I hope he learns that you can't build a life on lies and manipulation and expect it to last. As for me, I'm thriving. I have a career I love, with colleagues who respect me and value my contributions. I have friends who support me, real friends who tell me the truth even when it's hard to hear. I have a life that's entirely my own, shaped by my choices, my preferences, my dreams, and most importantly, I have myself back, the real me. The strong, capable, worthy me that was there all along, just buried under 5 years of someone else's lies. I'm dating again, but I'm in no rush. I'm learning what healthy relationships look like, what respect feels like, what it means to be with someone who celebrates you rather than diminishes you, and I'm learning to trust my instincts again, to listen to that inner voice that I silenced for so long. Last month, I ran into Emily at a coffee shop, Marcus's friend David's wife, the woman who had watched his public humiliation attempt with pity in her eyes. She came up to me hesitantly. "Sarah," she said, "I've been wanting to talk to you. I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For that dinner. For being part of it. I didn't know what Marcus was planning, but I should have said something when he stood up. I should have defended you." I looked at this woman who had been a passive witness to someone's attempted destruction of me, and I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment. She was just another person who had been caught up in Marcus's manipulations. "It's okay," I said. "You didn't owe me anything, but thank you for saying that." "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Watching you that night, seeing how calm you were, how you refused to fall apart, it made me start looking at my own marriage differently. I realized David and I had problems I'd been ignoring. We're in couples therapy now, actually working on things instead of just coexisting." That conversation meant more to me than she probably realized, because it meant that even in my lowest moment, when Marcus was trying to break me publicly, I'd somehow managed to inspire someone else to demand better for herself. That my refusal to accept his narrative had rippled out in ways I'd never know. So if you're watching this, and you're in a relationship that makes you feel small, if someone in your life constantly criticizes you, isolates you, makes you doubt yourself, please hear me when I say this. You are not pathetic. You are not weak. You are not the problem. You are not too emotional or too sensitive or too anything. You're just with someone who benefits from you believing you are. And the moment you stop believing their lies, that's when everything changes. That's when you realize you were never trapped, you were just convinced you were. That's when you remember your power. And trust me, once you remember it, once you reclaim it, once you stand in it fully, nothing and no one can take it away from you again. Because power isn't something someone else gives you, it's something you've always had. You just have to remember it's there. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to Revenge Sparkle for more stories of justice and empowerment, and comment below telling me where you're watching from. And remember, you are stronger than anyone who tries to make you feel weak. You always were. You just forgot for a while. But now you can remember.